This is Ambition Today.
These are the entrepreneurs, creators, investors, and builders who ambitiously change to the world. Explore the hardships and heroisms of everyday life while we reveal the key moments to leave behind a lasting legacy. This is Ambition Today with Kevin Siskar.
What's up, world? I am Kevin Siskar, and you are listening to Ambition Today. You can subscribe to our email newsletter on siskar.co and make sure you never miss the latest Ambition Today episodes. You can also get the most recent blog posts and thoughts we have on startups and technology. Last episode, we talked to Dennis Mortensen, CEO and founder at the artificial intelligence company X.AI. But today I'm excited we are joined by Andrew Weinrich. He's the founder at Andrew's Roadmaps and the chairman at Indicative. Previously, Andrew was the founder of the world's first social network, 6Degrees, which was sold for $125 million. Andrew, welcome to Ambition Today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us at your offices today. Where are we today?
We're at WeWork in Williamsburg, Brooklyn.
I love it. I don't make it across the river enough, so thank you for having us out here. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Westchester, a place called Edgemont. Went to Penn, law school in New York, at Fordham, and have been here since.
So you're a New Yorker, born and raised?
Born and raised.
Nice. And what drew you to history and law at the time?
History. So I majored in history. History has always been a great interest of mine, and I would say politics and political science has always been a great interest of mine. As for law, I think I fell into the category of not really sure what I'm going to do with my life. And I thought I was going to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't see what the path was, and so decided to go to law school. And this was after I think I was progressing through professions or ideas that weren't for me. So out of college, I joined Merrill Lynch as part of their investment banking analyst program, hated that, and then went to law school, which I think probably ultimately was a good experience. But when I advise people now whether or not they should go to law school, I say law school is really for people that want to become lawyers, not people that are figuring out what it is they want to do next.
Nice. And just harping on the history thing for a sec, how important and we're going to talk about some of the companies you've built and how you've kind of been a little bit ahead of the curve, the first social network, right? What role did history and your passion for it play in kind of being a leader as the future got built?
I don't know. I mean, my interest in history, I think, is more academic. It's an intellectual curiosity to. There are certain periods of time that are of great interest to me. With respect to the businesses I start, I like to think about where they will fit in history.
I like that.
And I like to think about what are the circumstances that would allow for someone to be disruptive in a specific space.
So let's talk about the first space you disrupted. So after college, you founded a social network called 6Degrees. What year was this? And tell me the story of how it started.
I was an attorney at a PC clone manufacturer in Manhattan. I mean, I got the job as general counsel of a PC clone manufacturer. It was my second year out of law school, I think largely because it paid so little, no one else would take it. But it was an amazing perspective about watching a technology company, a small technology company grow, a small technology company have these great aspirations, and the internet was taking off, and I had made the determination I want to be a principal in what I'm doing. And so I was part of a group that, or I was part of a team that put together a group meeting in evenings for the purpose of coming up with an idea. And so we set parameters for coming up with an idea that we would eventually all quit our jobs and do. And those parameters were, let's come up with an idea that couldn't have been done before there was the World Wide Web, right? This is shortly on the heels of the World Wide Web. The internet had been around for some time, but all of a sudden you're seeing adoption of the web. And so we came up with a number of ideas that I think could have turned into material businesses, but we discarded because they didn't fall into the framework that we had set forth, which was, let's come up with something that could not heretofore have been done. And I came up with this idea, what would it be like if everyone could index their relationships in a single place? There was a database where your Rolodex lived, and you could see the people you don't know through the people you do. And that, in effect, was the definition of a social network. If you think about what the social networks are today, their core asset is a Rolodex, right?
Right.
And so I said to the group, let's all quit our jobs and start this business. No one was want to quit their job. So I quit the group. I quit my job, and then I set about starting a company called 6Degrees that ultimately wrote the definitive patent in the space, which defined a social network.
So you got the patent on social networking.
So the LinkedIn actually now owns that patent. That's right. The patent, we sold when we sold the business years later, and then the patent was sold off to.
So how did the company grow? Tell me a little about that story and that journey.
I mean, I spent a year. We raised $25,000 from the second employee who didn't like his job and wanted to invest, and that and my credit card debt financed the company for a year. I couldn't raise money, and it was a big struggle to raise money. I mean, I was one of the things that was challenging when I started 6Degrees was explaining to people. Most people have the challenge when they raise money of explaining what their vision is, what they're going to do, and they don't need to contextualize it and say, let me tell you why the internet represents a good opportunity. But in 96, I was explaining to people why the internet was a good opportunity.
Yeah, why it even mattered.
Right. So I had a really hard time raising capital. Now, we eventually raised over $25 million for that business and dramatically scaled that business. But it was not people have this idea in the 90s, you just put out your hat and people put money in it. I mean, it was starving in the wilderness for quite a while.
Still hard.
And we were iterating and trying to launch the product and trying to demonstrate that this central thesis that people would index their relationships in a single place for the benefit of being able to explore their relationships was an untested proposition. One of the things that was interesting was, while there were many disadvantages to starting in the 90s, like, for example, it cost us millions of dollars eventually to build a database that could accommodate the type of queries that we wanted to. Today, you could build that same infrastructure that cost millions of dollars then for $50,000 now, right? There's cloud infrastructure. There's people wouldn't think about, buying Oracle licenses and Sunboxes. But one of the advantages then was, if you got an email, you felt like, a 12-year-old kid who got your first piece of paper mail. And so when you got an email which said someone wants to index you as part of a database and Andrew listed you as his friend, that was an incredibly novel and powerful piece of content. And so while there were disadvantages, there was the advantage of being in a space where we didn't experience all the clutter that everyone else did.
That's fascinating to think about now. The novelty of email as you use that. So it grew, and then you sold the company for, I think, $125 million in 1999. What was that experience like, right? And an exit over $100 million is every entrepreneur's dream. So what was that experience like?
It was exciting. It was. 6Degrees was receiving an immense amount of press. It was exciting, and at the same time, I think there were always feelings of disappointment. There are other companies that you see are going public or sizably expanding, and you make the determination this is the right time to exit. In the case of 6Degrees, we were not profitable, and the way companies were operating in the 90s were you raise as much money as possible, you grow as fast as possible, you pour that into whatever product you think is going to allow for your expansion, and then you just assume that there's going to be the availability to do another equity raise. And I had this sense that this, music wouldn't last forever. And so instead of trying to go out and undertake a massive equity raise, this point we had 100 people, I decided it was the best time, best opportunity to sell the business.
And then how do you orient yourself after that? I mean, that, as you know, stepping away from the company for a minute and as, you know, an individual, that must be a major life milestone. Obviously, you know,
I took off a little bit of time. I stayed with the company for a short period of time. I took off a little bit of time, and you know, I think it really, you know, I mean, as an entrepreneur, I think there are many things that motivate people. But I think a lot of the more interesting entrepreneurs, they're akin to real estate developers. They like the idea of walking down a street or driving in an area and being able to point to a building and say, I built that. And they aspire to build bigger buildings and more creative buildings, different styled buildings. But this idea of permanence, of, you know, can I point to my place? You asked about history. Can I point to my place in history? And is there something else I can do? And so, you know, I like to think my best ideas are ahead of me, not behind, even though, you know, I spent a lot of time talking about SixDegrees, but I like to think my best ideas are still ahead.
For sure. So, you know, talking about, you know, now versus then a little bit, what differences do you see between, you know, social networking circa the late 90s to 2017?
So with respect to social networking or entrepreneurship?
Social networking right now. I mean, and we're going to get back to entrepreneurship a little bit later.
Right. I gave a talk at Singularity several years back about, can you make predictions about social networking? And I'll share with you what I said. Social networking, SixDegrees was the largest social network until Friendster, which was the largest social network until MySpace, which had absolutely no possibility for anyone else to get into space until Facebook. And interestingly, even with Facebook, you see that their ability to maintain a dominant position now is predicated not just on scale, but on their ability to make acquisitions, right? So, for example, Instagram. And all of a sudden you're seeing new incarnations of social networks that are getting massive traction. Snapchat. What is the difference between social networking? How can you predict? I'm going to wrap these questions into one. How can you predict what the next introduction of social networking is? And that wraps into a bigger question, which is, how do I think about businesses? How do I choose businesses? Yeah. The incarnations of social networking, even though you can look at them and say they are particular to the visions of the founder, have largely been the result of circumstances exogenous to the founder. What do I mean by that? One of the central questions we had at SixDegrees was people writing in, can I put my picture in my profile? Imagine a social network with no pictures. That was SixDegrees, no pictures. Why were there no pictures? Because no one had digital cameras. So no one had a digital picture. So people offered to mail in their pictures via U.S. Postal Service. And we thought about how we would scan them in and allow people to associate a picture they sent in via U.S. Postal Service.
That's so interesting to think about now.
Which was not doable. What happened when you had the introduction of digital cameras, right? All of a sudden, everyone's got a photograph, and you have a whole new wave of social networks, Friendster, MySpace, and Facebook, that are based more on the visual than they are on the text component, just the core relationship component. What happened when you had interoperability of phone carriers? When you had interoperability of phone carriers and you could deliver text messages, not an issue you had in Europe because you were guaranteed for your SMS to get through. We have a new social network called Twitter, where the first incarnation of Twitter is 140 character driven by text messages because SMS becomes a mainstream way to communicate. In other words, social network correlates to a change in technology. You have photos, you have new social networks, you have the capability for text messaging, new microblogging platform. What happens when you have smartphones? When you have smartphones, now all of a sudden, there's an entirely new way to take photographs, to share them. And what do you see? A whole new instance of social networks, Instagram. What happens when you have other concerns that arise that are bigger issues of preservation of or memorialization, permanently of what you write, of your business profile converging with your personal profile, and this idea of you want a communication platform where your words are not preserved forever, right? You have Snapchat.
Yeah.
So the point is what's interesting is there are bigger macro trends, and if you're able to identify those bigger macro trends, which is hard to do, but if you can identify bigger macro trends, in some cases it's hardware, in some cases it's phone carriers that peer with one another. In some cases, right, the hardware could be the introduction of a smartphone. In another case, it could just be the fact that we have digital cameras, even on dumb phones, right? That was even on dumb phones before 2007. So that's a super interesting perspective to have, which is that not that entrepreneurs are driving every incarnation of social networks, but that entrepreneurs are responding to the totality of circumstances that are around them to build new social networks.
Well, and I think we had Jonathan Abrams on in a previous episode as well with Friendster. I think the fascinating thing is, you talk to VCs and investors and I won't touch social networking. That's so 2004, 2005, but I mean, really, it's not. It's just a new wave of technology comes along and social networking gets reinvented, as you're saying. It's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's funny you say 2004. I say 1996, but
yeah,
you could say 2004.
So, all right. So, let's have a little fun here while we're on the topic of social networking, and then we're going to get back to entrepreneurship here. But so there's a lot happening with social networking in 2017. Instagram is slowly, just methodically chipping away at Snapchat. Twitter, which is my favorite, and I love Twitter, but everyone says it's struggling with growth. Vine has shut down. YouTube is crushing it with their community. Facebook is like...
Wait, you said Twitter has shut down?
No, Vine has shut down. Vine has shut down. YouTube is crushing it with its creator community. Facebook is like meh, and my younger brother won't even touch it. Where do you think social networking is going? And what do you think could be the next technological change that triggers that new wave? Can someone win? Is Facebook just going to buy all the social networks? Can someone win?
So, win is the wrong question. The question traditionally for social networks is, if you build a big enough network, is the network effect so defensible that it makes it impossible for there to be new entrants? So it's not winning in a moment of time. It's monopolistic power for permanence. And the answer to that is no. This monopolistic power for permanence, if people weren't enamored by new experiences, then Facebook would not need to acquire new companies. So no, there's no permanence. It's not as defensible as people thought it was. That said, there are massive advantages to the incumbent player. Second part of your question, what's next? Well, think about what your experience is like with virtual reality, with augmented reality, with true real-time streaming video, with the convergence of all of these things, right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine, and people are imagining, that there will be new social networks that will push the limits from an experiential perspective. And is it the case that the existing players are likely to pioneer those new experiences? No. Because we just talked about this over 20 years.
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't happen.
So now, is it possible that these incredibly well-capitalized businesses that have huge existing assets that they can leverage to pour fuel on the fire, is it likely that a company like Facebook will acquire them? Yeah, sure, it's possible. But you will see new social networks, and they will be based on the things I just talked about: virtual reality, augmented reality, live streaming video in a way we really haven't thought about it yet. And then there will be the next thing and the next thing. So, is there an AI component to, there are macro trends, identify them, and then think about, what types of experiences people would like to have, associate them with those macro trends, and you can begin to imagine what are the next opportunities in social networking. Yeah,
no, you got my brain going. I'm picturing my Facebook profile just becoming artificial intelligence and talking to other people in VR. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, except the question is whether it'll be your Facebook profile. That was your initial question.
Yeah.
Or will it be your XYZ company profile?
Yeah, probably XYZ. Well, let's take a quick break. We're here with Andrew Weinrich. We're talking about social networking. When we get back, we're going to talk about some of the other companies he's started and what he's up to today. We'll be right back after this break.
This is Ambition Today.
If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a review in the iTunes store. If you don't know how to do that, you can just visit sysgar.co/review, and we'll show you how to in 3 quick steps. Ambition Today is happy to partner with the Founder Institute, the world's premier launch stage startup accelerator. We've now graduated over 2,500 technology companies across 6 continents, and over 35,000 people have applied. And as a result of all that data, we've taken from the admissions test, we've identified the 6 main personality profiles that most great entrepreneurs fit into. So if you think you have entrepreneurial DNA, you think you have what it takes to start a company, go to fi.co/join/ambition to take the test, apply, and find out. And Ambition Today is also brought to you by TopTal. That's TOPTAL. Say you have that idea in your head that you just can't shake, but you need someone to build it. Well, visit toptal.com/ambition today for a free 2-week trial with the top 3% of developers and designers. You own all the work, you own all the code from anything built during your trial, and you can get a lot done in 2 weeks, as someone from the team will reach out to you almost immediately. Again, that's toptal.com/ambition today to get started today. And now back to this episode.
Visit Ambition Today online at sysgar.co and follow the show on social media at Ambition Today.
Welcome back. We are here with Andrew Weinrich, and we were just talking about, the social networking, where it's been, where it's going. And so, you followed 6Degrees with a few more companies. Can you tell me what these companies were, and kind of maybe just rapid fire what your biggest takeaway was from each? I think it was Joltage, I stand for, Meet-Moi, Xtify. Indicative. Go for it.
I'll give you a 30-second on each. Joltage, one of the first operational support systems for Wi-Fi networks. Someone needs to build the back-end plumbing to bring Wi-Fi to hotels, airports, and when you authenticate at a location, you're doing that through a piece of software that authenticates you, provisions bandwidth, remunerates the hotspot provider. That's Joltage. I stand for one of the very first SaaS or ASP solutions that allowed for online fundraising for political campaigns. I think we had probably more races on the Democratic side of the aisle when we did this.
Can you bring it back? We need it.
We can talk about that. Meet-Moi, location-based mobile dating, even before the introduction of the iPhone. Xtify, mobile CRM. Xtify we sold to IBM. Meet-Moi we sold to Match. Indicative business analytics, and a boot camp called Andrew's Roadmaps. And let me see if I can tie them all together.
Yeah, I would love to hear how they all.
So my high-level perspective about starting a business is you should start a business in an area you are passionate about and for which you have some experience. If you cannot identify an area that you are deeply passionate about that plays to some, like in the case of social networking, I network a fair amount in my own life, and so it was consistent with my own thinking about meeting people and if I could index everyone's relationships, if I could index my own relationships in a place and expand my network, that was meaningful. But once you are beyond your obvious immediate passions, you begin to think about, well, what are opportunities where I can make a difference, where I can do something big? And my thinking about the opportunities where you can do something big is framed by my idea that entrepreneurs take advantage of moments in history. They are not determinative of those moments. And here's what I mean by that.
Yeah, I'd love to expand on that.
If there was no Steve Jobs, we'd have smartphones. If there was no Elon Musk, we'd have electric cars. If there was no Bill Gates, we'd still have a PC on every single desktop. Those entrepreneurs accelerated trends or opportunities or moments in time. And they were able to accelerate them because they recognized that supporting components of hardware or displays or new technologies were available that enabled them to stitch together the workings of their products that had massive success. So what does that mean for me or for any entrepreneur listening to this? 6Degrees, I didn't invent social networking. social networking is something that's existed since the beginning of time. It's how you find your doctor. You say, who do I know that knows a doctor? And even before, there was even before there were movies, you might say to someone, who do I know? Or who do I know that knows someone that can recommend where to go, what to read, what to do, right? That's essentially social networking. And you don't need technology for social networking. What was new was this idea that all of a sudden you would have user-generated content because there were tentacles from a single network that allowed everyone to contribute data. And so by recognizing that user-generated content would be a big opportunity, I could take an old construct and update it. Online social networking, as opposed to social networking. Wi-Fi. I didn't invent Wi-Fi. By the way, I didn't even come up with the idea that everyone should be using Wi-Fi all of the time. Wi-Fi was pervasive in corporate environments in the late 90s. Laptops most of them didn't come pre-installed with a Wi-Fi chip, but they came with a card that you could install. It was obvious that Wi-Fi was going to be used in public places. And there was a number of entrepreneurs who thought, I could take advantage of this and build a company around it. Now, the company that I built around that actually ended up not doing so well. But again, it was based on the same thesis that if I can predict where the waves are going to come, then that's my best shot to be a player, right? I don't have to make the wave. I just need to position my surfboard where the wave is coming in. Nonprofits, political campaigns lag in every single regard from a technology perspective behind what the private sector does. E-commerce had dramatically taken off in the late 90s, and here we are in the 2000s, and political campaigns are still raising money the way they were, principally raising money the way they were 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Now that was an obvious macro trend that fundraising would go online. And if I could take advantage of that, dating, inefficient, it was obvious to me it would move to a mobile environment, a mobile CRM. And we were delivering, actually we started after the introduction of the smartphone, and we recognized that push notifications would supplant SMS as a corporate channel of communication. Now, something a little bit more granular, maybe less exciting than some of these other trends I've talked about. But I believe that great entrepreneurs need to have a perspective on a space. And some of the best pitches I hear are people that say, let me tell you about where a space is going to go, whether or not I get into it, whether or not I win, whether or not I'm successful or I'm the biggest failure in this space in the world. I'm going to offer you a perspective about the direction of a space.
Yeah. No, and I think, your background in history, I would argue, that has probably allowed you to see those macro trends as they happen, just innately, because it's so ingrained in you when you learn things that young. So tying all that together and talking about these waves a little bit, right? Another friend of mine, Andrew Lee, sold his company to Zynga a few years ago, and he said, you always need to be riding a wave similar to what I'm hearing here, right? So if you're lagging in the wave and you're nonprofits and government institutions and you're Elon Musk and you're Steve Jobs and where do you want to be on the wave, right? When these things come through.
You want to be a critical thinker.
Right.
Yeah, if you're an early stage entrepreneur and you want to know what investors look for first and foremost, investors assume first and foremost that whatever plan you have is wrong. Whatever you launch won't be right. Definitely. It will require pivoting. The question is, are you someone who's capable of pivoting? And you're capable of pivoting if you're a critical thinker and you are, more specifically, a critical thinker about a space. You have an idea or you have formed a perspective about a space and you are trying to anticipate how that space will evolve in a way that's bigger than you, not just that's governed by you. So I think that's the most critical component about being a good early stage entrepreneur, is that you have a perspective. And I think the perspective informs when you should pivot.
So let's tying all this together, right? You were a founder during the .com era. And I know that your new podcast is called Predicting Our Future, right? So from what you've seen then through now, right? What macro high level changes are you seeing? What do you think's up and coming? What's next? What do you think the future has in store for us?
Well, I'll tell you, so the podcast I just launched is called Predicting Our Future.
Yes.
And the first vertical that we tackle, 6 episodes is construction. So the most fragmented industry in the United States is building construction. Now, in some countries, what do I mean by fragmented? I mean, more often than not, your builder is someone who's different than the person who pours your carpenter is different than the person who pours your foundation, is different than your plumber, than your electrician, and your architect is a different firm than the folks that are doing the building. And if there's engineering, that's probably a different firm still. In other countries, like for example in Sweden, a majority of homes are built in factories. Same can be said in other countries around the world. And in the United States, we typically associate modular or prefabrication with low-end, crappy mobile homes. But today, you can go out to the Hamptons and find multi-million-dollar homes that are built in factories.
Wow.
This summer, the tallest modular building in the world went up in Brooklyn, 32 stories. They were essentially boxes, modules, stacked on top of one another. And so when you talk about factory-built buildings, by the way, that project had a ton of problems, but there are a ton of other modular buildings going up.
Yeah, there's a company, Blockable. Have you heard of them?
Blockable is actually one of the companies that's interviewed. I did a total of 29 hours of interviews, 29 individuals around the world, academics, one of the largest developers in China, and most of the venture-backed prefab and modular startups in the building space. And all that allowed me to form a perspective about building, which is this. Here are some macro trends. We're going to add 2.2 billion people on the planet between now and 2050.
Oh, wow.
The population growth in the United States is projected to grow from 325 million in 2017 to 400 million. 90% of the incremental people worldwide joining us will be moving into urban environments, and we don't have enough housing. We don't have enough housing, and labor costs, if you look at what's happening in this country, are rising. And as you know, or anyone knows who lives in the city, when there is building, it's highly disruptive. So massive new demand for housing, cost going up, and the disruption of the build becoming more and more invasive to everyday life. All of that translates to an unbelievable opportunity for factory-built housing. And my guess is you will see a massive acceleration and massive excitement around factory-built housing the same way you're seeing around electric vehicles. It's just a new, less sexy space that has yet to turn.
Yeah, but it'll become sexy.
But I think it'll become an incredibly sexy space.
Yeah, for sure.
And that on top of the fact that, today you can get very excited about your connected home and not just your music and your television and your security, but shortly all your appliances are online. And you got to believe all of that stuff is going to get pre-configured in a factory. And not to mention the entire discussion about energy efficient homes and this whole conversation about net zero homes. Net zero homes are homes that consume less energy than they produce. So you can imagine what the future looks like if you can have very efficiently built homes. And I'm not talking about low-end homes. I'm talking about efficiently, aesthetically pleasing, high-end homes that are connected, that are energy efficient, and that cost a fraction of what.
I mean, even the blockable stuff is. Would you say blockable or blockable?
I think maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. I think it's blockable.
Let's say blockable. I mean, even they're beautiful homes, and everything is built into it. Water, heat, electric, smart lighting. Like they're beautiful, beautiful places. So yeah.
If it's blockable, what would that mean? It's for a bloke?
I don't know. It's been a long day. I need some more coffee.
Maybe it is. I think it's blockable. You should ask them.
It's definitely blockable. All right, great. Well, I want to take a quick transition here to the Ambition Today question of the day. If you're listening, you can go to syscar.co, our website, and submit any questions you want answered on future episodes. So Andrew, you're a serial entrepreneur. You've had multiple exits. A lot of people listening are maybe, thinking like, oh, if I just can, get rich one day, or if I can sell a company, or, hit $1 million in revenue, $10 million in revenue, $100 million in revenue or something, right? You've accomplished a lot of those goals. So what advice do you have for people who are in that mindset and are striving towards those things, what advice do you have for them from the other side?
I'm going to steal someone else's advice.
Go for it.
When I was at Penn, Joan Rivers came and delivered a talk, and she said something that stuck with me.
Okay.
And so I am going to share her advice. She said, take a job you would love so much that you would pay them to do. And if you do it well, you'll eventually get paid well. Take a job you would love so much you would pay them to do. And if you do it well, you'll eventually get paid well. So if you start a business, you're not paying you're essentially not getting paid. You hire people, you're really working for them, right? Yeah. And you're their leader, you're working for them. You bring on investors, you're getting underpaid, you're working for them too. It's kind of like Joan Rivers' advice. Take a job you're doing because you believe in it so much, you love it so much. And then I would add one piece to that, which is entrepreneurship is hard. It takes a really long time. Like your time frame should be, 10 years for a business.
Yeah.
And so if you follow Joan Rivers' advice and you have a long time frame, your odds of success go way up. I mean, if without knowing what you're doing, without knowing the domain, without knowing anything about the capitalization or an individual, or that if you just told me there is an entrepreneur who is so passionate that he or she is prepared to devote the next 10 years and has that type of persistence and that type of passion, that alone separates an entrepreneur from 99% of the other entrepreneurs. People don't realize it, but that really is, there's too many people that are, can I build something and flip it in a day?
Yeah, and I totally agree. And
that usually doesn't work.
Well, and my favorite part of what you just said is, you heard it at Penn, right? It stuck with you, at the start of your journey. It stayed with you through your journey, and you've basically validated it, right? Because I know, people who have not achieved that dismiss stuff like that as cliche, and I love that you heard it, spent your life, held it to you, validated it, and I couldn't agree more. So thank you for that. Thank you to everyone listening. Thank you for listening today. The show notes include everything from this episode, links to everything we talked about. They are up on our website, syscar.co. Screenshot this episode, share it on Facebook or 6Degrees with your favorite quote. Be sure to share this episode. If you love Ambition Today, then think about joining the show's back channel. It's full of exclusive access reserved for the best fans of this show, which is why I'm only mentioning it at the end of this episode. Thank you for listening and being one of our best fans. In addition to supporting the show, the back channel also includes a bonus question from each episode of the podcast. Join today and hear the single best piece of advice Andrew has ever received. Andrew, thank you for taking the time today. Where can people find out more about you and what you're up to? Well, come to Predicting Our Future, and you'll learn a fair amount about my perspective. That's everywhere podcasts are found? It's everywhere podcasts are found. And you go to predictingourfuture.com. Okay. The boot camp I offer is andrewsroadmaps.com. And I can be reached at A. Weinrich at andrewsroadmaps.com as well. Okay. All right. Well, stay curious, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Ambition Today. Be sure to visit syscar.co to get all the information from this episode and more great content. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.